Hello everyone! The merge has been out for a few days now, and we've all had our grubby little fingers on it. And so now the question must be asked, was it worth it? Was the 12 months plus, or maybe a little bit less, of development, the entire uprooting of the campaign system that we all knew, was it worth it? Is it good? Well, kinda. There's good and there's bad. Let's jump into it and talk about it, starting off with the good. And the number one best thing, in my opinion, about the merge update is the fact that I no longer have to press tab at the beginning of a game and sit there and watch as the game fills with bots and starts with a full team of bots on both sides because there just wasn't enough players. Right now, since there's less queues, the campaigns aren't splitting the player base 12 different times, you can actually play a game of Enlisted with real people. I know that seems crazy to you guys out there. I know, it's nuts, but it's true. You could play a game with real people, and in my multiplayer video game, that's kind of a priority. So, in my opinion, the fact that we actually get real people in our games, not filled with bots, I don't have to lose a game because my whole team was just bots. I just have to lose the game because they all play like bots. You know, it's a subtle difference, I know, but an important one. The other thing that's amazing is the fact that you can actually play low tier now. Previously in Enlisted, you didn't really get to play low tier. Like, if you did queue with a bunch of bolt actions in, like, Normandy, you typically just kind of got shit on. Like, I personally, you guys know, like, I have a lot of gameplay videos where I would like to do weird stuff and use, like, Lee infields and stuff like that. And it was always a difficult thing to do because the second that I queue into someone who's using real gear, right, actually using high-level stuff, I would just get absolutely slaughtered and it wouldn't be very fun at all. And so now I can actually queue a game of Enlisted with Lee infields or with low-tier bolt actions and play against other people who are also using low-tier bolt actions or low-tier weapons. You don't have to play in these lobbies that are filled with people using the absolute best of the best gear. And not to say that there isn't, you know, a meta or that there isn't, this problem doesn't exist nowadays, but there's at least a way for people to get around it by queuing in battle rating 1 and 2 and kind of in 3. Well, again, we'll talk about that later. The people who want to queue those high-powered matches can, and the people who want to play the low-tier matches absolutely can as well. And it's fantastic to see that. It's a really great change in my opinion. Now moving on to some of the more minor things that are great, but not, you know, as great or not as impactful as the other things. Number one, the tech tree, and specifically how the tech tree reduces the overall grind of Enlisted. Now the grind isn't really where I think it should be in my honest opinion, but it is better than it was before. There's people out there that are saying the grind somehow got worse, and I honestly have no idea how those people think that. I think maybe these people just like never got to top tier before and now they're in top tier. I really don't. I have no idea how you could possibly think the grind got worse. I've done the math. The Allies campaign, as an example, is 9.2 million XP to unlock every single thing that the Allies faction has in the current post-merge Enlisted. For reference, to level 40 in pre-merge Enlisted, you know, maxing a campaign to level 40 was 5 million XP. And there was 3 different Allied campaigns, so 15 million XP. It's been shaved off by nearly 33%, right? That's a pretty substantial, like, overall reduction in the grind, right? I don't really understand why people think the grind has gotten worse. It hasn't. In fact, it has demonstrably got much better. So while individual levels might cost a little bit more, your overall investment into Enlisted has actually gotten much better. And it's also easier now to grind the things that you specifically want to grind. If you don't want to fly planes, you don't have to. You don't have to grind planes in any way, shape, or form. You can just ignore them and you can shave off another several million worth of XP and get the stuff that you want that much faster. So I think that is a fantastic change. I think the tech tree is amazing. And I really have no idea where people are coming from when they say that the grind got more and increased overall. I already touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to mention it again. Variety is so much better in post-merge Enlisted. It's crazy. And this is also kind of a bad thing. We'll talk about that later when we get to the bad stuff. But I think it is fantastic how much more variety I see in games. There's so many more like random vehicles that I see in games that I didn't see before, and it's great being able to see players experimenting and using different vehicles and weapons and things like that and finding out what works really well. Like, for example, I see a lot of tier 5 players using the Flame Panzer II because it can dish out so much damage so fast, and that's a tier 1 vehicle, right? Like, it's really cool seeing people kind of pull these different things out and trying to find those little quote-unquote meta things and trying out these different like builds and what they can make work, right? I just think that's awesome. And then you can also do builds where you're like, oh man, I'm gonna play as like the British in Normandy, and I'm gonna bring my Firefly and a Churchill and use all Lee Enfields. And yes, this has its own problems, and again, we're gonna touch on that in just a little bit, but I think it's still just a really cool thing, and I think the overall variety that I'm seeing in my matches has gone up substantially since the merge released. Coming up on our last little bit, guys, the perk system, okay? This is pretty obvious. I've loved the perk system since it was first shown off in the first Enlisted merge test server, but it's still great. It's so much fun to use. It's fun to kind of like min-max your soldiers and decide like, do I really need 40% vertical recoil reduction, or can I get away with 20%? Is 30% enough? Should I get this perk? Should I get that perk? This is a gunner, so they're going to take this perk. There's all these different little min-max things that you can do, and I haven't found anyone that's agreed on the best overall kind of perks, the way that old Enlisted kind of had like a set of like 3 or 4 perks that everybody was always using all of the time, no matter what. The only big downside to this is that Vitality is still really strong and way too strong, so that's still a problem, and I really hope in the future the devs nerf Vitality. It's just too strong of a perk, but generally speaking, the perks are more interesting, they're more fun, they're more player choices and decisions involved regarding the perk system, so I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. There's no more randomness and anything like that. It's just go in, get your perks, move on, and it's nice. It's really nice. Now we move on to the bad stuff. The reason why you clicked this video, if you're here to rage about the merge and how much you hate it, let's talk about it. And I think most of this stuff is stuff that we already know about, and probably more frustratingly, stuff that we mentioned in previous test servers. I know that I, for one, everything that I'm talking about here is stuff that I've talked about in previous videos. It's stuff that I've directly sent to Enlisted helpers and have been told that it has been sent up the ladder to the Enlisted devs, and yet it didn't seem like it was resolved. Some of it is even stuff that was mentioned months ago, right? Like genuinely months ago, nearly 6+ months ago, and yet it wasn't ever fixed. It wasn't ever dealt with. I mean, personally, that feels frustrating to me, but regardless, let's jump into it, starting out with the most obvious issues with the Enlisted merge, which in my opinion is the fact that high-tiered Enlisted, battle rating 5 Enlisted, is an absolute dumpster fire, especially when you're playing as the Allies.
This is fun. Are you having fun?
Of course.
And Eminem, are you having fun?
The Allies simply do not have a good answer to the Tiger II right now. I don't think that this means that it's impossible to win as the Allies. By no means do I think that. In fact, the opposite. I have like 80% win rate as the Allies, playing a lot of high-tiered games. But the reality is that it is very difficult, and you need typically higher skill to win as the Allies right now than as the Germans. Because if you're playing as the Germans, you can just kind of farm people in like a Tiger 2P, and no one can really do anything about it unless the enemy team is fairly competent and also has high-tiered weaponry. It's just a general problem. The Soviets fare a little bit better, but I also think a lot of people are flocking to the Germans right now just because of how dominant of a faction they kind of are, right, at those high tiers. So that is a pretty major problem, and maybe the upcoming Ardennes campaign is going to add some content that's going to help specifically the Allies out. We will see. Hopefully it does. Maybe it doesn't. But regardless, high tier matchmaking right now in Enlisted is a absolute dumpster fire. It is not fun. I personally haven't been playing most of it. I've been spending a lot of my time in low tier games, and I recommend you guys do the same, to be honest with you. One of the reasons why this system is so bad and why Tier 5 feels so bad is because of the fact that Tier 3 can either be tiered up or tiered down. And that's not only is that kind of confusing, like I don't think a lot of players kind of understand what's happening regarding that, but it's just not really a good system because it's either you get tiered up and you're playing against people who have substantially better gear than you and it's basically like old Enlisted, right? Or you're getting tiered down and you're just like seal clubbing people with no resistance, and that's not really fun either. So the whole like tier 3 can go up or down. Like I get why in theory the devs wanted to do it, but it's not good. It doesn't work. Like, again, this was something that I mentioned in my review over the system, that this was going to be a serious problem. And lo and behold, it is a serious problem. Because right now, you have people who are loading into matches, right? They want to play in, like, the Pacific. They want to play Tier 2. They want to play in Tunisia. And the second that they get a Normandy match, they just nope out of there. Right, like they're just gone. They're like, I'm not playing in Normandy against King Tigers. I'm not going to be going around in my M4A2 Sherman and getting slaughtered by these high-level players with STGs and all this stuff. And when I have no choice, like I'd rather just down tier and stomp people, which then means you have a bunch of people quitting games. A lot of it comes to, like a lot of tier 5 matches comes down to like which team has more or less tier 3 players on it, and then the team that has more loses. And again, this isn't always the case. Like skill plays a major role in all of this, but generally speaking, it's just a frustrating experience. And on top of all of this, there's a serious problem from a player experience standpoint, because if you're a player that just unlocks something in tier 3, you're actually incentivized to not use the thing you just unlocked, because if you do, you're going to have to play against tier 5 players who they're just going to slaughter you, right? So like if you unlock a new vehicle in tier 3, you have to like not use it, which is like unintuitive and not fun. So tier 3 needs an entire rework. It's probably a video in and of itself to talk about an entire rework for that. So I'm not going to do it now, but just the bottom line is that tier 3 sucks. All right, now onto the minor stuff, the kind of minor criticisms, the things that are annoying but aren't too big of a deal, starting off with the fact we got 1 billion squads. Okay, this was such a dumb thing that they did. I'm shocked that they even went through with this. I mean, we mentioned this months ago, 6+ months ago. We said, hey, if you guys launch this with 120+ squads for Germany, it is going to be so unbelievably unorganized and chaotic, and people are going to hate it. And they do. Wow, fancy that. We were right about that. Crazy stuff here, guys. I mean, it is insane to me that they thought it would be okay for us to have 120 squads, 8 different engineer squads, all of which have different vehicle or different weapons that they upgrade, all of which have different stats. The Stalingrad engineers can use assault weapons for some godforsaken reason. They walked that back. It's confusing. It doesn't make sense. And they are rectifying part of this by letting us sell these squads, but in my opinion, they just should have put this squad selling mechanic in the first place. And in my opinion, they really should have just not done this shit in the first place. They should have just like not had 128 squads. They should have nuked like 90% of the squads. And yeah, a lot of people were complaining like, I want to play as my Stalingrad squads. I want to play as my Italian squads. Like, I get that. Why didn't we just add customization where you get to choose what squad you are? Why are our squads linked to historical squads? Just don't make my squad the 101st Airborne. Make my squad generic assaulter number 69, and then I can make my squad the 101st through customization. It's a double whammy win. It's less confusing. There's less clutter. There's customization for players so they can choose to do it how they want. And also, Darkflow gets to make money because they get to sell these customization options. I don't understand why that's not what's being done. It doesn't really make any goddamn sense to me. I truly do not understand this, short of we're not capable of coding something like that, which to me is crazy. You had a year to do this. How are you not able to do this? Maybe it would break the whole game. I don't really know. But I think that the fact that they launched this game with 128 plus squads is like hilarious. Okay, it's like, it's so tedious to go through them. It's so unorganized. It's so chaotic. The amount of players that I've seen that said that they opened the game, saw that they had like 800 squads, and then just quit is like way too high. Like people are quitting the game because it's too complicated, and Enlisted is already an overtly complicated game, like unnecessarily so. It's just bad. It's just not a good idea. They really shouldn't have done it. I wish they would have listened to us. They didn't, and here we are. Moving on to the last thing, guys. Speaking of the tediousness of the squads, presets are garbage. This is something that we also mentioned to enlisted helpers who also said they passed the information along. I don't know why presets exist like this. Right now, if I make a preset for tier 2 and I use Assaulter Squad number 1, and then I make a preset for number 4 using that same Assaulter Squad, I have to manually go through and change those squads, or the weapons in that squad out. To say this any more, you know, to explain this a little bit more, if Assaulter Squad 1 has all PPSHs, and then I save that as tier 5, and then again I go and I change it to tier 2, and I save a tier 2 loadout using the same squad, using all PPS 43s, and I save that as a preset, they're still going to have the PPS 43s whenever I load my tier 5 preset. It's not going to give them the PPSHs, which is insane. Why would you do that? It should save whatever weapons they have. Shit, it should save what perks they have, in all honesty. I don't see why we have to, like, spend silver to reroll perks. Like, it's stupid. It should save everything. I should be able to click a button in the same way I do in War Thunder and switch between these two different systems, these two different, you know, loadouts, these two different presets. It doesn't help me for presets if I'm not if I still have to manually go in and change the goddamn, like, weapons. The whole point of the preset is to cut down time. Why do I still have to do it? It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that's such a... It's not a big deal. It's not that big of a deal. It's like, you know, you gotta do like 20 extra clicks. But it is stupid. It's like one of those things where I feel like a lot of... it kind of sums up, I think, my ultimate feelings about the merge. And a lot of Enlisted, for that matter. I think the merge has kind of highlighted a lot of this for me. And it's the fact that I think a lot of Enlisted is just kind of like half-baked. And that feels bad. Like, the more that I play the merge, the more that I kind of think about all of these mechanics in Enlisted that are just like half-baked, right? They're just things that, like, the devs seem like they kind of were like, oh man, this would be cool. Or like one guy at Darkflow was like, man, I made this in my free time, right? I had an extra 2 hours today and I made this. I made it to where we could drop napalm on from our planes. And then the devs were like, great, push that in an update. And it's like, well, why didn't you make it to where, like, we could choose to bring napalm on more of our squads? How come we can't, like, only those planes could bring napalm? Why did you spend development time? And this is getting on, like, me as a producer, right? My background in game development is as a producer, which is about managing time. Like, to me, I'm like, why did you spend development time working on that and making that if it's not going to be in the game for, like, the majority of players and we can't, like, use it? That's just, like, a waste of time. I don't know. It's crazy to me that they do that. And there's so many things in Enlisted, and that's kind of where the merge comes down to. So, I don't know, guys. That's my final thoughts on it. The merge is great. It's good changes, but ultimately it is very clumsy. It's very half-baked. And that's my thoughts. What are your guys' thoughts on the Enlisted merge? I'd love to hear them down below. Leave a comment. Leave a like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, as I'm sure the devs would as well. So leave that down below. And without anything else, I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.